The wedding ceremony is over and it's all been a great success. The planning was good and the occasion wonderful. Part of that success was the cake. It's the focal point of the wedding reception, and so it's really important to take care of the details well in advance. This means deciding at least 3 months before the big day the style and size of the cake you want. Now this is what we're going to concentrate on. Just how you choose or make the right cake. Whether it's for a large or small wedding, traditional or informal, this program will help you get it right. This cake is an example of successful sugarcraft, and there are skilled men and women who can create work like this. You'll usually find them in smaller bakeries or working from a specialist kitchen. If you want to buy a tailor-made cake, don't leave it to the last minute. Find your baker and tell him roughly how many people you want to cater for. He'll know how big to make your cake and give you a price for the work. You can get about 50 portions from a traditional 8-inch square cake, such as the second tier of this one, and a total of about 50 portions from this entire cake, which is made with chocolate sponge. Your baker will also have a catalogue with photographs of cakes. When you choose a design, you will also be choosing the kind of icing that's used to cover the cake. Traditional designs are made in Royal Icing, which is fairly brittle. It can be kept simple, or it can be finished with heavy ornamentation like this. An increasing proportion of modern wedding cakes are covered with ready-to-roll icing and finished with natural-looking sugar flowers or simple ornaments. You may even find a specialist who will cover a wedding cake in chocolate or buttercream frosting. Very popular if you have a sweet tooth. It goes without saying that they're all delicious. Elaine McGregor has an international reputation as a cake decorator, and she'll be demonstrating and explaining how you can make your own cakes look as professional as the ones we've just seen.
Hello. Having looked at those cakes, I'm sure you'll feel inspired to make your own. In this program, I'm going to decorate 5 very different cakes for you. You'll find exact details of the equipment and the ingredients I'm going to use in the booklet, but I'll give you the general recipes for them while I'm talking you through the decorating. Before I start decorating my first cake, which is this pretty 2-tier creation, I'm going to show you some of the tools I'll be using. The most important of these is a smoothly running turntable. This one's made of metal because I do an awful lot of icing, but you can buy a lighter plastic variety if you only want to do a little bit. I use a 20-inch non-stick rolling pin and these special smoothers. I also use a stainless steel side scraper and a straight edge. And a selection of icing nozzles are very important. These are plain nozzles for line piping, stars and shells, basket weave. I have some parchment triangles, but if you prefer, you could always use a nylon bag. Those are the tools. Now let's get to work. You'll need to marzipan your fruitcake about a week prior to coating the cake. Begin by filling in any holes that you have, and as you can see, I've already done that to this cake. In order to get the straight sides needed for a royal icing cake, it's marzipaned in 2 sections. First you do the top, and then you do the sides. You need to roll your marzipan out to about 1/4 inch thickness, and if you use your rolling pin, you can actually skid across the surface to make sure that it's flat. In order to estimate how much marzipan you're going to use, one of the easiest ways is to weigh your cake and divide the weight in half. So if your cake weighs 6 pounds, you'll need 3 pounds of marzipan. Now, I'm going to put this marzipan, I'm going to turn it upside down onto my board, which I'm putting a little bit of icing sugar so it won't stick. And I'm going to, before I do that, I need to cut the size. And I'm going to use my tin that I bake the cake in. So cut around that and take your excess marzipan away. Brush the surface with some piping gel, or you can use boiled apricot jam, but make sure that it is boiling if you use it. Turn the cake over onto your marzipan, and if necessary, just trim up any edges because the cake has shrunk slightly in the baking. You can smooth the top of your cake by rolling it with your rolling pin and brush a little bit of your gel around this top edge. Now roll your sausage of marzipan and stick that to this top edge. Oops. If you're doing a very big cake, you don't need to roll a sausage to go right round it. You can do it in sections. Pull the marzipan onto the surface of the cake. Just make sure that when you turn the cake over, it doesn't fall off. And you can trim away any excess. I was a bit over optimistic with that and put a bit too much on. Now you can roll out a sausage of marzipan that needs to be about 3 times the diameter of the cake. So an easy way to do it is to use your rolling pin and you measure it once, twice, 3 times. So it needs to be just a little bit longer than my actual rolling pin. So roll this to a thickness of about 1/4 inch. Make sure it's not stuck to your work surface. Lost my icing sugar. And then you want to cut it to the height of your cake. So again, you can use your straight edge or your side scraper to give you an approximate measurement. Remember, it's just got to be a little bit longer than the rolling pin. Now, jam up the marzipan. And you simply wrap this around your cake. If your cake is a very big one, sometimes it's easier to actually roll the cake along the length of the marzipan. Where you've got your overlap, you can just cut straight through. As your marzipan's soft, you'll find that it will just go together with the warmth of your hand. Trim off any of this excess. Use your smoother on the sides to make it nice and straight. And then all you need to do is position the board it's going to stay on and turn it over. When you lift the cake board, you'll find that the top is perfectly smooth. It can now be set aside until you're ready to cover it with your royal icing.
At all times, avoid contact with flour, since even the smallest amount will react with the marzipan and may cause fermentation and mould growth, especially in warm weather.
Royal icing is just sugar and egg white, but rather than using a fresh egg, I use powdered albumin. And I have half an ounce of albumin to 3 ounces of water, which mixes up to 1 pound of icing sugar. Dissolve the albumin in the water, and it'll appear very lumpy at first. Just keep stirring it every few minutes. It'll take about half an hour to actually dissolve. So you can just sit it aside for a few minutes and then come back to it and stir it again. This is some that was made up yesterday, and you can see that it's totally dissolved. Now it will keep for about a week if you cover it with cling film and put it in the fridge, and you use it exactly the same way as you use a fresh egg. Put it into your icing sugar. I have a pound here. Right. And then turn your mixer on to the lowest speed, and you actually beat it for about 15 minutes. Scrape down the bowl about every 5 minutes and keep beating until it'll stand in peaks and has lost its wet look. I usually make up a big batch and then take about half of it, to which I add some glycerin, about a teaspoon per pound. This keeps the icing soft. The rest I save for the actual decorations, and it's a good idea if you actually label your bowls so that you don't mix them up. To keep your icing in good condition, put a layer of cling film right down over the surface of the icing to eliminate any air, and that stops it from crusting. But the actual icing I'm going to use for working with, I just keep covered with a damp cloth. When the marzipan has dried, you can start coating the cake with royal icing, but you must make sure that it has dried thoroughly, and this is very important because if it's not hard, the pillars could sink through the icing. So don't keep your marzipan cake in a damp place or it'll never dry out. Use a palette knife to put the royal icing onto the top of the cake and paddle it so that you get rid of any air bubbles. Bring it right out to the edge. If you need some more, put it on. Then use your long rule to actually smooth the top. The best thing is if you tuck your turntable in against your middle, you've got something to support the cake. Hold your rule like this, and starting at one edge, take it across the top to the other edge, turn it, but don't turn it over, and bring it back towards you. Try and keep the pressure even on both sides, and don't worry with this coat if you have a lot of air bubbles in the surface, because all you're doing at the moment is sealing the cake. Then you can take it right off the other edge. Take any excess icing off the side, and you can leave it to dry for about 6 to 8 hours. If you can allow this drying time, then you'll end up with a much better finish.
After the top's dry, we put the icing up the sides.
Then hold your side scraper against the side of the cake, hold your turntable quite firmly and go round the cake in one complete action. By the time you've given your cake 3 coats of icing, you'll find that you will have hidden any of the imperfections. And then you want to use a knife to get rid of these build-ups of icing on the top. Just take it gently. If you try to get it all off in one go, you just mark the side of the cake. Okay. And where you've got your take-off mark, you can just clean that edge up as well. So now that we've got a good finish on the sides, we're going to actually make the board look good too. To do this, put some icing around the board. And again, use your palette knife. Again, hold your turntable and hold the knife at an angle and just go right round and off. And then you can clean up the edges. And to make sure they're really clean, just use a damp cloth around the sides. So that's the coating done. Now let's get on to the pretty bits. But first you're going to have to make a piping bag, and this is how. I use vegetable parchments that have already been cut to size. Hold the parchment at the top with the right angle at your wristwatch. Take it around your hand and pull it. Bring this side up and pull it in tight. Fold it in, make 2 little nicks and fold that in. Now I'm going to do the shells on this cake with a number 6 nozzle, so I cut off about 3/4 of an inch and drop the nozzle into the bag. In fact, I haven't cut quite enough off there because I want the nozzle to become a continuation of the bag. Pick up your icing and give it a quick beat so that you know it's the right consistency. And take a knifeful and put it inside the bag. Pull the knife out at the same time pushing the icing down. Fold the 2 ends in. Take off any excess icing. Make 2 little folds and then 1 big one. And you hold your piping bag with your thumb at the back. Now, as I said, I'm going to pipe some shells around the top edge of this cake, and to do that, I push the icing out of the nozzle, stop pushing, and pull it back. Push it again, and cover the tail of the one ahead of it. And you simply go right round the cake with your shells.
Decorating this cake is simple. We use 2 ribbons for the side, pinning the end and pulling it round the cake, sticking it and the bows with piping gel and removing the pins later. The pearl beading is stuck into a piped line of wet royal icing. We also use wet icing to stick the silver ornaments into place. Then we assemble the cake onto plaster pillars. It's in the booklet. And arrange the top piece and sprays. Not everyone wants to eat fruit cake, and the great advantage of soft icing is that you can use it on lighter cakes like this Madeira. To get a really smooth finish, first of all you put on a thin layer of marzipan, and then you do the same with the icing.
So we start by preparing the Madeira. To make sure that the marzipan sticks to the surface of the cake, I'm going to use a little bit of buttercream. You can use boiled apricot jam or piping gel, but I found this method is the best as it also fills in any little holes as well. If there's time, put it in the fridge for the buttercream to harden off a little bit, as this makes it much easier to coat. You'll find the recipe for the buttercream in the booklet and also a table to estimate the quantity of marzipan and sugar paste that you'll need. So I've got the right amount of marzipan rolled out, rather like I did for the Royal Icing cake, but rather than cover it in two parts, I'm going to cover this all in one go. Measure the cake. You can use your rolling pin, measure up one side, across the top and down the other side, and you'll see that it's about the right size I've rolled out. Lift it up, and I use my arms for this because I find it's easier. You can support the whole marzipan with your arms, bring it to the cake, take one hand out, and as you take the other hand out, smooth across the top. Flare the corners and bring them in and up, and do each of the corners the same way. You'll find that the sides will just look after themselves. It's important that you bring the paste in and up rather than down and out, because if you take it that way, you'll find that you tear the corners. So bring it in and up. Make sure that it's stuck to the surface, and then cut off the excess. Do this in a variety of ways. You can use a knife, like so. You can use a smoother and do it all in one go, which is a lot quicker. Put that to one side. You'll find working on a soft cake like this, your marzipan will move a lot more than it does when you cover a fruit cake. And you cover a fruit cake exactly the same way. Now we use the smoothers. We use the big one on the top. Really push hard. You can hold it on the side and smooth around. Now the whole idea of this type of cake is to get rounded corners. And then just to finish off, we use the handle smoother. Come up and over the edge. You do a fruit cake exactly the same way, except that when you stick the marzipan to the fruit cake, you use piping gel or boiled apricot jam like I did with the Royal Iced cake. Now I'll quickly go through the covering of the cake with the ready-to-roll icing, and you'll see that the technique is virtually the same as putting on the marzipan. The only real difference is that I brush the marzipan with an alcohol, rum, brandy, sherry, whatever you fancy really, but the main reason you're using the alcohol is to sterilize the surface of the cake and to make sure that the sugar paste sticks to it. Go right around. You can always finish off the brandy in your coffee. Pick up the icing, bring it to your cake, take one hand out, smooth it off, flare the corners, And I'm polishing it with my hand to seal up any cracks and creases. Use the warmth of your hand to do this before you use a smoother. Cut off the excess. And then use your smoothers in exactly the same way as you did before.
You can buy this icing in tubs. You'll need about 4 to 5 kilograms, 8 to 10 pounds, to cover this 4-tier cake.
While the icing is still soft, I'm going to have to use crimpers to engrave a pattern. Crimper designs must be applied to the freshly covered cake before the sugar paste has time to dry out, so don't delay this part of the process. What I'm doing here is I'm actually cutting a paper pattern to fit the cake. And the scallop pattern itself is actually in the booklet. Pin it into place. Decide which crimper you're going to use. There are many patterns, and I'm going to use this double scallop. I found that many students like to put a rubber band around the crimper to stop it opening too far as they use it. You can stop it from sticking by dipping it in some corn flour or icing sugar. Simply push the crimper into the surface of the icing and pinch the teeth together. You can use your pattern as a guide and just crimp just above the paper. Take your time, position, crimp together, release and come out. And that really is how simple crimping can be. Once the icing has hardened, preferably overnight, you can trace your patterns. I've traced this pattern from the booklet and enlarged it to fit the size of the cake, and now I'm transferring it to the actual surface by scribing through the paper like so. And you can take your pattern off and you're ready to start piping. I have 3 nozzles, 3 bags each fitted with a number nozzle, dark pink, light pink and green. And I'm going to start working on the ribbon bow by piping small lines following my scribed outline. I change bags and I pipe some green. And keep the tip of the nozzle just away from the icing so that you have control. And push the icing out of the bag. You see how quickly a pattern builds up. And pipe some little forget-me-nots. And just finish off by piping a few little green leaves down here. Now you just want to go right round the whole cake, filling in the designs as you go. And when you see the 4-tier, you'll notice that the colours actually shade up as you go up the cake. To make sure that the frills stand out, you want a harder kind of icing than you've used up until now. So mix into it a quantity of petal paste, about 1/3 by weight. Roll out this mixed paste until it's very thin. And I'm rolling it on a thin layer of corn flour so that it will slip. Now, the thinner your paste, the easier it is to make your frills. So roll it until you can almost read through it. Make sure it's released. And then I'm going to use a serrated cutter with scallops, and this one actually has 3 snap-in centres, so I can make 3 different sized frills. I'll cut one out. Oops. Take the centre out, and I'm going to pop it under my floppy mat so it doesn't dry out. Cut another frill. Don't try and do more than about 2 at a time, because you'll find that they only dry out while you're working. Make sure that the frill slips easily, and so have plenty of corn flour down to roll on, and use the end of a cocktail stick. Now, I'm not left-handed, but I use my left index finger to roll. The lighter you roll, the longer it's going to actually take to frill. So really push quite hard, because the secret is to get this frilled as quickly as possible so that it doesn't have time to dry out before you lift it up onto the cake. Cut it open, and then I just use water to stick it to the cake. Just paint about 1/4 of an inch down from your crimping, because this frill is the underneath one. Pick it up, just bring this a bit closer, and position it onto the cake. Don't worry about the top edge of this underneath frill, because it's going to be totally covered. Use a soft dry brush. Make sure it's stuck, and you can lift your frills up. If they don't stay up, then you can put a little bit of paper tissue underneath them, especially if you want them to stand out a long way from the side of the cake. Once the first frill is in place, a lighter coloured one is put over the top, but this time I'm actually going to push it right up into the crimping. Once I've got it more or less in place, I can use the dog bone modelling tool just to gently push it up into the indents. Before we can go on to decorate the top of the cake, we need to position the pillars to hold the upper tiers. I've already done that with these 2, and now I'll show you how to place the pillars on this tier. I'm going to use these pillars as they have a hole in the bottom to lock onto the top of the skewer. Position the skewer into the cake, and I've used the template that's in the booklet to give me the impression of where the positions are going to be. Score it just above the surface of the cake. Take it out, deepen the score with your knife, and then all you need to do is snap it. You can clean up the top of the skewer, push it down into the cake, and simply lock your pillar into position, and that way the weight of the upper tier is taken on those skewers.
When it's all set up, we can put the top piece on and then the flowers. Both are made from sugar, and the details are in the modelling and the flowers videos. You don't have to ice a cake with icing at all. This coating and all of the decorations are made with real chocolate, and when it is cut, you'll see that the cake itself is a checkerboard of chocolate and vanilla sponge. This pattern is created by building up the finished cake in sections. We coat the marzipan cake with melted chocolate. You'll need about 3 pounds for a cake this size, and it's best pouring through a sieve. We tap the rack to spread the chocolate evenly and save the chocolate in the tray underneath.
In order to make the decorations, I need to make a special sort of edible chocolate paste which can be modelled and moulded by hand. Some people call it plastic chocolate, other people call it chocolate leather. I have 140 grams of warmed liquid glucose and 180 grams of melted white chocolate. And I'm going to pour the liquid glucose into the chocolate. Make sure you get it all out. And stir it. Take it out of here now. And it'll go all sort of coagulated and thick as the two things mix together. Once you've got it to this stage, you can now turn it out onto your surface, and I'm using a non-stick silicon mat here, which actually takes temperatures up to 500 degrees Celsius, so I could even pour boiling sugar onto it. But nothing actually sticks to this. Now, knead your paste, and you'll find that the oil in the chocolate will start to come to the surface. And you want to make sure that you've got it well mixed together. You'll feel it going smoother under your hands as you work it. Now, it's very important that you leave this for 24 hours before you use it. And the best thing is to wrap it up in some silicone paper and put it away in the fridge.
It's just the same for dark chocolate.
I've rolled out some paste, and I'm going to use my Garrett frill cutter. Now, instead of frilling it like we did before with a cocktail stick, I'm going to use one of these resilient sponge pads and a ball tool. And I'm simply going to rotate the ball tool on each of the little scallops. Now, one of the nice things about this sort of leather, chocolate leather, is it never really sets. You'll find it's easier to paint the edges with the gold if you do it before you cut the frill. And I've got some gold non-toxic paint. And all I do is paint around the top edge of the frill. Once you've gone right round the frill, then you can cut it like we did the other one. And I'm going to stick it to the cake using piping gel. Remember when we put the gum paste frill on the other cake, it was put on with water, but this time we need something that's a bit more sticky. Lift up the frill and you simply position it in place and use the ball tool, the small end this time, just to push it up and stick it onto the cake. To finish the decoration, I've made some chocolate roses and leaves, and the detail of how to make these are on the Sugar Flowers video. I'm going to start with the rose on the board, and I'm simply going to use a little bit of melted chocolate to stick them on. Now, because this cake is going to be set up without pillars, I can make the spray as big as I like.
Let's have a closer look at this chocolate fantasy cake. The next cake is also iced with ready-to-roll icing, but the design is inlaid.
First, trace the pattern in the booklet and enlarge it to fit your cake. Then you need to cut the actual individual pieces out of plastic, and I've used a clear shirt box lid for these. Put them into position. A good idea is if you just lay them underneath the actual pattern so that you don't have to trace anything on the surface of the cake. And because the icing is still soft, I can just very gently inlay them into the paste. And the same with your flowers, making sure that you get right up into the points. When you've been over the whole cake, you can then use your smoother just to finish it off. Make sure you haven't got any marks in it. And now it's ready for the actual inlay design. This is done with a mixture of ready-to-roll icing and gum paste, because it makes the actual paste a lot easier to handle. It doesn't dry too quickly. Use the design of the leaf that you have already inlaid and cut around it. And paint the area with gum arabic glue so that it will stick. The recipe for the gum arabic is in the booklet. Pick up your leaf and lay it in position. And then use your smoother to push it into the inlay area.
The flowers and stems are cut and inlaid in the same way, and that's all there is to inlay work. We've looked at some modern cakes, but this one recaptures the Edwardian era.
It's very difficult to bake such high cakes. So the easiest way is to construct them out of 2 or more cakes. And for the top tier, we've got 2 6-inch rounds. For the middle tier, we've got 3 9-inch rounds. And for the bottom tier, we've got 3 12-inch rounds. Now I've got here 3 marzipan cakes that have been put onto thin cards. Put a piece of silicone paper between your lower 2 and simply stack them one on top of another. Then they're ready for icing, just like you would do a normal royal iced cakes. The boards separating the layers make it much easier when you come to cut the cake. To make the bevel on the base, stack your cake on 2 or 3 boards that are about 2 inches bigger than the actual covered cake. And the easiest way is to fill in the area with some royal icing in a large tube. use your knife and come round the board. You can do that 2 or 3 times until you have it smooth. You'll probably need to put another layer on so that you hide the edges of the board. Once it's completely dry, start on the decoration. This is the middle tier, and the patterns have been taken from the booklet, enlarged to fit, and then traced onto the cake. It's very helpful to have a tilting turntable because piping is much easier to do on an angled surface than on a vertical one. I'm going to start with this long U shape, which becomes the vase.
Elaine pipes a series of lines, section by section, beginning with the upper vases. This is the stem line for the grapes. As they dry, they are overpiped to build up their shape. She pipes a foundation at the end of each stem, which will become the bunches of grapes. With the number 4 nozzle, she begins to build up the vase.
You can overpipe again with a finer tube, so you're building these up by starting with a 4, overpiping with a 3, then a 2, then a 1.5. The grapes I do with a number 2, and these again are just little teardrops piped up the big teardrop that was done originally with my number 4.
This is the foundation for Elaine's hollow stem piping.
Now the leaves are piped with a leaf nozzle, which is a specially cut nozzle, and start at the end of your stem line and push the icing out of the nozzle. Because it has this little cut in the middle, you'll get this little vein. The shells in the middle are piped with a rope nozzle. And then filled in with a zigzag.
She continues to overpipe the vases now that the first lines are dry. She continues her hollow stem piping and piping on the inside of the previous line. The hollow stem is finally closed. The ridge is finished with a line of tiny icing pearls.
The finishing touches are the pieces that have all been piped off the cakes. I've got the discs that separate the tiers, and these have been piped with a shell and some fine line piping. The scrolls I'm actually going to show you how to pipe in a moment, and the coronets have been piped on the release paper, which is actually wrapped around a tin so that they're set on a curve. Now, The release paper is a Teflon coated cloth and nothing really sticks to it. So I'm going to use a 44 tube, and starting with the scroll at the bottom, I pipe it around. Let the icing fall out of the nozzle. You'll get a much nicer line if you do that. Now, these make 1/2 of a pear. So you have to do another pear in the opposite direction. You'll find the patterns for these are in the booklet, but you will need to enlarge them to fit each cake.
The scrolls are also overpiped to build them up.
Then do your opposite pear. When they're dry, you lift this one off and you sit it on the top of this one. So in fact, you're going to end up piping 12 pieces altogether. When they're dry, stick the 2 pieces together with a line of Royal Icing down the middle, and then overpipe that line with a row of shells and leave them to dry. The final assembly of the cake is really quite easy. All you need to do is start by overpiping this petal design on the top. Put your disc into place, pipe a shell around the edge, and then pipe a fine shell with a number 5 right around the edge, and while it's still wet, stick your coronets into place. The actual scrolls, all you need to do is to pipe a little bit of icing here and here, and then they literally just get pushed into place. And it really is as simple as that.